So much, Program Director, and good afternoon, distinguished mayors and ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to skip some slides in the interest of time, and for those of you that would like to get more, you're welcome to invite me for a drink this evening. Then you can hear it all, especially when I get a bit drunk. All right, thank you. What I want to do is to just really build on what my colleague Kobe has outlined, and basically try to share with you from our experience with the cities that we work with, what sort of projects should we be seeking finance for? What sort of targets should we want to achieve with this money? And what sort of projects would accelerate really green growth in African cities? So I'll skip that for the drink this evening, and I'll also skip that for the drink. I'll skip that for the drink, but maybe let me start from there, but by just emphasizing that having said or having listened this morning that cities have a role to play, in Africa, this is the reality. This is what we are dealing with, given the impacts of climate change in this region. So we have cities, of course, that have to play a key role in driving economic growth in this region. But we also have cities that are really battling with floods, droughts, fires, as well as heat waves. And how do we reconcile the two? What sort of targets do we set so that we can actually deal with this reality, but at the same time propel our economies for the future? So I'll first of all really try to look at the targets. And in looking at the targets, we need to start with the problem itself. So from our data, we actually look at the emission problem in African cities, of course, also within the context of the global C40 cities. So for us to green growth, obviously, we need to minimize or to eliminate emissions in our cities. Now, when you look at the emissions from cities, there are some sectors that we need to focus on. So to begin with, we need to really look at the issue of solid waste management. And I'm starting with this one because, of course, when you look at it from a global perspective, in C40 cities, solid waste only contributes 8% of the emissions. But in Africa, we are above that. We are above the global average because we contribute 22% of the emissions, they're coming from solid waste. So we need to really look at this issue, as Kobe was saying, seriously. And from the studies that we have done, the target that we are encouraging cities to look for money for and achieve is that by 2030, 12 years from now, we must ensure that 100% of our waste is collected, 100%. And at least 20% is diverted from the landfill. At least 20% is diverted from the landfill. And we need to really roll our sleeves and get to work on solid waste because the problem is huge on the continent. I'll give an example of some of the African cities and the effort they are making just to highlight some of the projects that can be replicated, that once you get the financing, you can replicate in your cities. Dar es Salaam, for example, it's a city where presently it's estimated that around about 20% of Dar es Salaam waste reaches the site. Of course, when it's collected, of course, just like in many other African cities, we have sometimes informal collectors, sometimes they drop it at the nearest graveyard that they find, or it doesn't reach the landfill. But Dar es Salaam is recognizing that problem, and they are actually at the moment developing a plan to upscale the Pugu dump site and build an integrated waste management center, including composting facility, sanitary landfill, and landfill gas capture in one integrated kind of like program. And we are trying to partner with them, with the Dutch government, to see if we can bring that to reality. In Accra, I'm picking some of the cities that are in the room. When the city completed their greenhouse gas inventory, they found that there were high levels of emissions coming from solid waste. And the mayor took the initiative and closed 33 out of the 42 illegal dump sites and engaged the private sector to actually construct 2 solid waste transfers. Those are some of the efforts that cities are doing. Cape Town has a program which connects over 490 companies with unused or residual resources to create a business and employment opportunities in products that would otherwise have been taken to the landfill. Addis Ababa has just launched the first of its kind in Africa, the one that you see in the picture there, the Rapi Waste to Energy plant. And the plant will supply 30% of Addis Ababa's household energy and incinerate 1,400 tons of waste a day, which account for roughly 80% of the city's rubbish. That's what we're talking about. That's what we should be thinking about when we are getting this, we are looking for this financing. There is an opportunity in Africa. There is some substantial support that we are getting from the Climate and Clean Air Coalition partnership to the region. And there is also plans to actually have under this coalition a network. And I have a colleague from CCSC in the room, and I would like to encourage you, those cities that would like to take on this pathway, to actually meet my colleague. If you can just stand up, sorry, I'll put you on the spot. To just meet my colleague and see if you can tune in to discuss what sort of solid waste management initiatives we can do. But also, there is yesterday there was an event, and I'm sure Cecilia will talk about it, where there was also a launch during the World Environment Day of another initiative, but I'll leave that to Cecilia. So that's the first thing. Secondly is mobility. We need to think the next generation mobility. 32% of the global emissions are coming from the transport sector. In Africa, we are below, yes, but still not good, 25%. And for us, the target is we need to achieve densities that minimize demand for journeys. Instead of having all these sprawled cities, we need to begin to concentrate our activities in one place so that people do not just, we really minimize mobility in our cities. And the target is that in Africa we increase density by at least 8%, and we ensure that 80% of total distances traveled in our cities are either by mass transit, not private cars, or cycling, or walking. That's the target we're talking about. So when we look for these monies, we need to really think of projects around that. How do we improve walking in our cities? I can't walk in some of the cities because of security. How do we improve that? How do we improve cycling in our cities? And we need to also aspire by 2030 to have 100% of our buses zero carbon. Is that doable? African cities are also rolling their sleeves. There are some activities that are out there that you can actually replicate, that actually can propel the region into kind of like a green growth pathway. 11 of our 12 cities are actually involved in bus rapid transit systems, just to really improve mass transit. Just to give you an example, Dar es Salaam has just launched their BRT, and the picture that you are seeing there, and it's really 130 kilometers for this phase, and is already transporting about 200,000 passengers daily. Lagos and Addis Ababa also have got their light rail transit systems. At first, I used to think those are just for Europe and maybe South Africa when they did how train. But we have light rail transit system, The Addis Ababa one also won the C40 award and carries up to 60,000 passengers across 4 lines every hour and has a cumulative emissions potential forecasted at 1.8 million tons by 2030. It is also creating 6,100 jobs and improving transport speed in the city from 10 kilometers per hour by road traffic to 22 kilometers per hour by LRT. Lagos is also developing a new BRT corridor along the Bega Iyana Isolo via Ikotun, those of you that know Lagos, and is approximately 28 kilometers, 213,000 passengers, ridership of 298,000 by 2032. Nairobi has approved $600 million project to invest in cable cars in the city to reduce notorious traffic jams and carbon emissions. These are projects that are common in Latin America. And those are some of the things that we should be thinking in the transport sector. Cairo transitioned its taxis from really diesel to using gas, just to also minimize emissions. So they're using compressed natural gas for the taxis. And Tshwane just nailed it further by becoming the first city in sub-Saharan Africa to operate city buses that run fully on CNG. So there are projects out there that we can direct the financing and replicate across the continent. Number 3, buildings and energy efficiency. Have you ever wondered, mayors, have you ever driven in your cities at night? You'll see that there are some buildings, maybe corporate buildings, with lights on, and all the employees are at home sleeping, and have remembered to switch off their lights in their bedrooms, but they haven't switched lights at the office. So we are having these inefficient buildings in our cities. And buildings actually, they contribute 53% of the emissions in Africa. And this is where we need to actually focus our energies if we are to make Africa green. So we need to set really ambitious targets, and for us, by 2030, we must ensure that at least 55% of all new buildings are ultra high efficient in terms of energy. Really zero carbon buildings, at least 55% by 2030. And for those existing the existing building stock, let's try to aspire that at least 35% of private buildings have at least one retrofit. We have done some things to these so that at least we are saving energy in these buildings. 4 cities in South Africa have taken a commitment to pilot, implement, and enforce ambitious low carbon to zero carbon building requirements going beyond the national standards. So they're saying, yes, national government allows us to go this far, but we'll try to take it a little bit higher. If the program proves successful, that's the kind of program that C40 would like to see financing being directed to in the rest of the African cities. One of the biggest challenges to Africa's economic development is inadequate or unreliable access to energy. So African cities are trying to expand the electricity supply system by diversifying to other energy mixes, especially the renewables. So we have Nairobi, Accra, Lagos, and Dakar that are engaging with international cities to improve their energy mix. And we have Tshwane developing a business model for municipal rooftop solar and energy storage projects. And we have Durban that is receiving technical assistance to actually develop the first municipal wind energy project in South Africa, and to determine and test all major components of its wind turbines before installation, and design and the electrical infrastructure, and install and commission the wind turbine technology at the municipal level. Johannesburg is looking at opportunities to transition to hydrogen fuel cell technology in municipality clinics following a launch in Rustenburg as a pilot, which I think it has happened already. Then next, and I'll be closing soon, we need to also focus on clean air. So if we cannot do some of these things for the sake of emissions, if you are a naysayer or you're doubting, then at least do it to improve the quality of air in our cities, to be actually in line with the guidelines set by World Health Organization. World Health Organization actually estimates that the largest single environmental health risk that we have, and is fast becoming one of the leading causes of illnesses and deaths in developing countries, is actually air quality. In Africa, about 600,000 people per year die from exposure to household air pollution. And the impacts of air pollution in many African cities affect not only health, but even economic growth. So we need to look at the rising vehicle emissions that are a huge contributing factor, including from cars without catalytic converters, some cars that we actually import from countries that can't even use them. We need to see how do we put a bit of a plug on that. And as I said earlier on, a number of African cities are transitioning to mass transit to try to minimize that. And of course, also the technology transitioning to CNG to try to minimize pollution. But besides the cars, open bush burning, cooking using inefficient cook stoves, and use of diesel generators like in Lagos are also a contributing factor. And we need to focus on finding solutions, monies that can actually resolve that. Finally, the elephant in the room is about adaptation. We can do all these things in Africa, but if we don't deal with the climate hazards, it will be a facade. So we need to make sure that as we green our cities, as we take this sustainable pathway, we also focus on resilience. And most of African cities, as Kobe mentioned, are actually depending on colonial infrastructure that has deteriorated, and we need to really focus on infrastructure development. One of the financing institution representatives that came here yesterday was very emphatic about us really diverting or investing a lot on infrastructure in Africa, and he had a point. You know, sometimes I just want us to imagine what would we see if we excavate the infrastructure that is underground, the stormwater drains, the sewer lines, the water supply pipes that are underground. I'm sure if residents are to see them, some of the mayors really will be on terrible heat, under pressure. The only thing that residents are not reacting is because they are buried there. They're conveniently buried there, we can't see them. But sometimes we do see the impact of the status of that infrastructure. There is one city that I will not mention where residents woke up one day to water from the taps that was really smelling sewage. And an investigation was made. This is last year, not so long ago. And they realized that the sewer line and the water supply line came into some fellowship and exchanged their contents. Of course, there was all legal compensation, but yes, you can be compensated with money, but you have still consumed dirty water. That's the state of infrastructure under the ground. So we need to take this seriously. And the adaptation, as we focus on adaptation, if we are not really serious about infrastructure, the impacts will be high, and they will not just affect the environment. As you can see on that diagram on interdependencies, they affect all sectors. The telephone lines will be down, the electricity will be down, they will affect distribution of food, so the impact will be enormous on the economy. So this is something that I would like us to, in Africa, to really focus on, to get partnerships on, and deliver on infrastructure for adaptation, green infrastructure. Finally, and this is, let me just mention one statistic. There was a report that you should read from African Development Bank on infrastructure deficit in Africa which was released this year. And basically what they're saying is that the deficit is sitting at around 90 billion US dollars every year for the next decade. That's how serious the problem is. Then I will not be a good African if I say all these things and not mention that raising living standards and reducing inequality are critical issues for our African cities. So as we address climate change, let's really try to see how we can integrate issues of unemployment, youth unemployment. How do we integrate issues of informality in terms of settlements as well as informal business? How do we integrate issues of business? This is Africa. Those are the issues that we deal with. So as the mayor was saying that we need to have African solutions. There should be solutions that are contextualized within the African context, solutions that have an African complexion. So these are things that we should not lose sight of. In Nairobi at the moment, I think you have heard of a project with a code, with a slogan, Operation 7654, which seeks to integrate Mukuru informal settlement and upgrade the settlement and make it resilient by making sure that there are stormwater drains, make sure that there is energy supply from renewable sources, and really improve the livelihoods of people in Mukuru. I was there, and I'm just like any other African traditional person who was raised believing that a man should not cry, but I cried when I was in Mukuru, just because the situation was just pathetic. So these are the issues that we need to deal with. I close by saying, if you still are a denialist, as Premier Makura has said, and you think maybe climate change is a hoax, let's still do these things because of the co-benefits. We all need clean air. We all need energy security. We all need green jobs. We all need livable cities. We need water, and we need healthy children. So if you cannot do it for climate change, then please do it for this. And I thank you so much.